永子家族的各位亲友们，各位长辈们，我是金慧，我目前还在武汉汉口这个疫区。我向大家汇报一下，目前我们整个湖北甚至全国的疫情情况。现在已经有9万多人次。这个病毒的传染几率是多少呢？就是一个人传染之后，如果说他没有被有效的隔离的话，或者说进行有效的治疗的话，他会传染给他身边的14个人，那么这个基数就很大了。
Coronavirus, plague of the century. This disease, a strange coincidence, haunts many people. Every 100 years, a deadly disease strikes humanity by surprise. These are the 5 diseases that have coincidentally or prophetically appeared every 100 years. 1320, the Black Plague. Caused by Yersinia pestis, usually spread by fleas. It originated near China and spread all the way to East Europe due to Hun raids. From there, rats that went inside merchant ships from Crimea to Italy spread it to the rest of Europe. The symptoms began with the appearance of buboes, which were inflammations of the lymphs. They could be as big as an egg or an apple. Then came the fever and the vomiting of blood. Spots and rashes appeared in the body, caused by flea bites. Acral gangrene, which causes the flesh and the skin to die and turn black, appeared slowly in the fingers and spread rapidly through hands, arms, feet, and legs. People back then thought the disease was caused by great pestilence in the air and could be transmitted by breath, or coughs, or simply breathing at all. This created one of the first quarantines in the city of Ragusa, where the council established a 40-day period for sick inhabitants and foreigners to remain isolated from the city. A plague collector would roam the streets with a wooden cart asking people to bring out their dead. Plague victims were piled and taken to a plague pit, which was a massive grave where victims of the Black Plague were buried or sometimes burned. 1520, smallpox in Mexico. With the arrival of Spanish conquerors to Mexico, a wave of smallpox accounted for at least 70% of Native American deaths. In Tenochtitlan, many colonial chronists mentioned that a black slave that came with Cortez had the smallpox and was the one to begin the contagion at Tenochtitlan. The later conditions of the Spanish siege of the city, caught in the flow of fresh water and food, contributed to the advancement of smallpox at the city. The outbreak of smallpox even caused the death of Aztec King Cuitlahuac. After the 2-day incubation period, small red eruptions become present in the tongue and mouth, then all the way to the throat, face, legs, feet, and hands. On the 5th day, pustules filled with dark, thick liquid appear. A few days later, victims would usually die. 1620, Leptospirosis. Transmitted through rat urine, Leptospirosis was brought to the New World via European explorer ships. These rats transmitted it to raccoons, beavers, and other mammals, which in turn peed in bodies of water the Indians used to fish, drink, or bath. 15 years before the Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth, Samuel de Champlain had surveyed Cape Cod and what would become Plymouth. He saw many Indians living in the coast and having many cornfields. But by the time William Bradford had arrived, he found a beach full of skulls and bones lying where the old dwellings used to be. 9 out of 10 Indians were killed by this disease. Symptoms include red eyes, cramps in the legs, and organ failure. 1720. Yersinia pestis, the same that had caused great despair in 1320 and 1420, returned to France in 1720. Contaminated silk was shipped in the Grand San Antonio, which had brought products from Smyrna, Tripoli, and plague-ridden Cyprus. In the voyage, a Turkish passenger died, but its corpse was thrown to the sea. Before arriving to Marseille, The boat planned to stop at Livorno, Italy, but their authorities refused its entry and sent the ship to some sort of quarantine island. During that time, 4 other passengers died. Inspectors checked the corpse and determined they had perished due to a malignant and pestilent fever. The ship decided to continue on its way to Marseille. When Grand San Antonio arrived at Marseille, it was placed under quarantine thanks to some sanitation laws that were passed in the 16th century after a plague. All boats were required to serve quarantine, but the conditions varied if the ship carried a health bill, which accredited that there were no signs of sickness aboard. Crew members were inspected and no signs of pests were found. The captain gave the account of the deceased during the trip. During its second quarantine day, 2 other crew members died. Though the ship remained in quarantine at an island, they also carried the silk and cotton bales died a few days later. It was decided that their bodies and clothes would be burned to avoid contagion. But silks had already been delivered, and with them, the sickness that would travel to the entire city. A few days later, hospitals were oversaturated. Corpses lied on the streets. Mass graves were improvised and filled quickly. Parliament enacted a law of death penalty to anyone who went to Marseille or contacted them. A pest wall was erected to isolate the city from the rest of the provinces, but it was too late. The pest had already reached some nearby cities. About 40 to 50% of Marseille died during those weeks. 1920, Spanish flu. A deadly disease that propagated itself during the First World War has many theories about where it began. One of them is that it originated in Spain, but scholars say it was just a thing of propaganda due to the fact that Spain was neutral and had no censorship in its media as France, Germany, or England did. Another theory is that the disease began in the American Midwest and was spread by the military who joined the Allies in World War I. The third one involves China. During World War I, Great Britain needed laborers and soldiers on its front line. They decided to recruit Chinese workers. Due to time, they could not wait for them to be shipped from China, so they decided to ship them to Canada instead. A ship with about 2,000 Chinese left the plague port of Highway, bound for Vancouver. When they arrived, they were quickly placed on a sealed train so that racist inhabitants would not know Chinese were being brought to Canada and deployed. The train was to take them to the East Coast so that the shipment towards Europe would continue. On this ride, contagion spread wildly, and by the time they arrived at the East Coast, many were seriously sick. Racist views at the time claimed this was due to the weakness of their race, so castor oil was given to them so that they could get better. By the time they arrived at France, contagion spread to the soldiers, and due to the filthy conditions of the French trenches and the fact that around 100,000 soldiers cruised through them each day, the weak immune systems of the soldiers were struck by this new flu, which mutated and became stronger, then spreading itself through Europe. Patients with the flu would develop dark spots in their cheeks from lack of oxygen, as lungs were filled with bloody substances. Pneumonia attacks, diarrhea, and aches eventually led to their death. It was easily transmitted from the sneeze of one person to the other. It was deadly because it triggered an overreaction of the immune system, thus explaining why young adults were most of the victims of this disease and not old people or children. With no antibiotics, antivirals to treat the illness, or even vaccines to prevent the flu, suffocation until death was the most certain thing for those infected by it. 2020 Coronavirus. On December 31st, 2019, a person who ate at the Hunan seafood market ate a contaminated animal, possibly a bat. On January 7, Chinese authorities had identified a new kind of coronavirus that was part of the same family as the severe acute respiratory syndrome and the Middle East respiratory syndrome. On January 9, the first death related to coronavirus was recorded in Wuhan. On January 13th or 15th, authorities from Thailand and Japan confirmed coronavirus infections from travelers that came from China. On January 17, A man from Wuhan arrives at Washington state and begins contagion in the US. On January 13, Chinese authorities suspend travel in and out of Wuhan. On January 24, Chinese authorities recognize their hospitals are overwhelmed with coronavirus-related patients and decide to build a new hospital for around 1,000 or more patients. On February 3, China completes its new hospital in just 10 days. On February 5, a cruise ship is halted near Yokohama. 64 of its passengers have coronavirus. Up until February 8, a US citizen dies in China. Death toll reaches 700 victims, with the coronavirus present at Japan, Thailand, Australia, Vietnam, Philippines, France, Germany, Sweden, the US, and Canada. This virus can be transmitted through small droplets that are expelled when a person sneezes or coughs at a distance of at least 6 feet or less. Until now, it is unclear whether it can be transmitted if you touch a contaminated object and then use your fingers to rub your eyes or mouth. Symptoms begin 2 to 14 days after the infection. These include fever, cough, and difficulty breathing, or even pneumonia. Supposedly, a Chinese doctor claimed to have spotted the outbreak way earlier, but was forced into silence, which has many wondering if the number of victims could be way more. Others claim the virus was not safely contained at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, causing the outbreak. Some even claim the virus strain of the coronavirus had been sold by Canadians to China. The last of the conspiracy theories aligns the Great Plague outbreaks of all the 20's, such as the ones I just showed you. The truth is, there are no evidences backing up any of these theories. What do you think? Is this a governmental weapon gone wrong? Is this how World War III begins? How long until the cure and vaccine can be found? Let me know in the comment section. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and do comment what sort of videos would you be interested in the future. This is all for now. Good night.